we will go deep into the realm of the unknown and question everything as we search for the truth. We will explore the possibility of countless phenomena within the ultraspectrum, and together we will learn that it is all connected. This podcast is brought to you by the Experiencers Support Association, and it is a live stream broadcast. If you have a question, send me a super chat or become a YouTube member. This podcast is brought to you by the Experiencers Support Association. Take a seat, relax, get ready, and welcome to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat. Today is Thursday, August 4th, 2022, and I, Ryan Stacey, am your host this evening. I'm a licensed private investigator, citizen journalist, and the Director of Investigations for the Experiencers Support Association. I'm former National Chief Investigator for MUFON Canada and the former International Field Investigator Trainer for MUFON in general. Welcome to the channel, and thank you for joining us this evening. Super chat, click the $sign next to your name in the comment box below. And tonight's topic is Canadian UFO research and Shag Harbour. Our guest for Season 4, Episode 26 is Chris Stiles. Chris Stiles is an active UFO researcher who investigates select classic and current UFO incidents that have occurred in Atlantic Canada. He holds to a blended view of the UFO phenomenon that allows room for both the ETH, which is the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and a significant psychological component. He is best known for his work on the 1967 Shag Harbour Incident and has presented at several MUFON symposia in both Canada and the U.S. Chris served as a paid technical advisor with several Canadian UFO featured documentaries, such as Ocean Entertainment's The Shag Harbour Incident and Northern Lights. He has appeared in several U.S. UFO specials, such as Canada's Roswell and UFOs II, Have We Been Visited? And in 2019, Stiles appeared in an episode of Ocean Mysteries with Celine and Fabien Cousteau. Chris is the co-author of two books on the Shag Harbour Incident, Dark Object, Dell Bantam with Don Ledger, and Impact to Contact with Arcadia House with Graham Sims. So Chris, put on your tinfoil hat. We're about to go down a rabbit hole. How are you doing this evening?
I'm fine, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. And boy, your graphics put me right in the mood there at the start. I love it.
Did you like that? Thank you.
Yeah,
we're trying to get everybody all hyped and ready to go. It's the show. It's Thursday night. Why not? Appreciate that. All right, so we start the show with an icebreaker, which is brought to us by Stacey. So I'm just going to play her little jingle here. So Cece runs our Experiencers Anonymous group, and she's also our book reviewer for the Experiencers Support Association. So she asks for this evening, what is the best way to deal with a skeptic on the subject of ufology today? Good question.
Yeah, and I've had to deal with a few. I'll put it this way, it's best not to try and bend any arms. That doesn't work when people are on the opposite side of the fence on any issue, right? But I find that, if you do the work, if you present the evidence and you make them listen and you just tell it and tell your successes and failures. I mean, to give you a good example, I can remember the first time, let me put it this way. I spoke in the United States, and that was in 1996, the July 4th weekend, if I remember, at a MUFON conference in Greensboro, North Carolina. And sitting in the right in the front row was Cy Scopp and the skeptics and the infamous Bill Glass. And he was sitting there with his little cassette recorder in hand held out. I was the third speaker of the day. Before me, Kevin Randall was there, and he fell asleep during him. So I come up and I just thought I do what I do. And I did it. And a couple of times I addressed him by name through it, sort of thing. Now, Phil Glass will tell you this or whatever. And there was a bit of a giggle. And I said, no, We need him. He does important work too. I said, sometimes he's overzealous. Sometimes it's not as good a work as he thinks he does. And I kept drawing him into it. When my presentation ended, there was a standing ovation. When it was done, he came up to me and wanted to get his picture taken with me. And he leaned in my ear, Ryan, and he said, you know, he says, I remember that case, and you're right, something did happen there. He said, I'll probably explain it someday on my website. He says, don't let that bother you. I don't know. It's a sort of answer to your question, but the thing is, you just do what you can do. You know, all you have to offer is your work. You can't bend arms, right? And you really can't change minds. What you're hoping to do is to open their mind to the possibilities to maybe someday, somehow see the error of their ways, if that's indeed what it is. You know, I mean, none of us have all the answers. So,
yeah, we need, it's good thought too, because we do need people to be skeptical. You know,
we do.
Essentially, it's like it's philosophy, but like,
yeah,
not accepting the knowledge. So, like, I mean, they're not really inclined to believe the information as it's been theorized.
Yeah.
The problem I have with skeptics is when there's fact involved, because fact is fact.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be skeptical when we're talking about theories.
Mm-hmm.
But if the fact is presented and the fact is fact, can you really still be skeptical?
Well, a lot of American voters can be, as we've seen, sort of thing.
That's
yeah,
we don't have to worry about that.
No, but Ryan, you know, the thing is, you know, in this field, you know, there's not a lot of peer review given to the research, right? So for that reason, we do need the skeptics. And for now, we'll have to settle on both the good ones and the bad ones, right? And because we need it, because, you know, we don't bring it, you know, when you go to these conferences, when you do a job, when you first present these things, when you publish a book, when I appear on a podcast or whatever, all too often these things are love-ins. You know what I mean? There is not a skeptic element. There is not a peer review. And one of the things I feel is that each of us, you know, in our work, you know, in a sense, we have to kind of be our own skeptic. You know, you have to be thorough. You have to go back and see these things in context, right? Mm-hmm. I know when I look at cold cases, you know, sometimes the words, I know right away when I read anything in the media, I'm immediately realize that it needs a closer second look, because, you know, you see a phrase in an article such as, you know, newspaper coverage where it'll say 2 amateur astronomers saw this at such and such a time. But when you go back and locate those witnesses, you'll find that 2 amateur astronomers probably turn into 2 men with a telescope, which is not quite the same thing, which casts, you know, a different weight upon whatever evidence they provided, right? So, you know, in a sense, we you know, if we're responsible, if we're doing our job, we should fill that role. But of course, many of us don't, you know, and we all have a bit of, you know, bias toward finding what we want. But I think it's ethical for us to try and resist and fight that, you know, to go on and, you know, certa bonum certum in Latin, fight the good fight, you know.
But there's not, see, I can acknowledge that we have both and they are needed. And I can tell, especially in Canada and in the United States, there are those who decide I am skeptical and this is what I'm going to do. And I'm dedicating my life to this belief and this is what I'm doing. But they're challenging each other, but not really accepting the possibility on either side. So when do we get to a point where the skepticism is also the skeptic is willing to accept the theory or have their mind changed?
Well, I think sometimes it helps to back up and make them look at the larger picture, because often you find when you back away from the topic of the day, the case of the day, the research conclusion or of the day, and you look at the big questions, sometimes you're actually on the same page or a lot closer together. You know, to give an example, he's not the best example of a skeptic, but when you think about the late celebrity astronomer Carl Sagan, right? As Stanton used to call him, Uncle Carl was not the worst of them, of course. He was skeptical about the premise, when it came to UFOs and the extraterrestrial hypothesis, for example, he thought that it was valid, as a consideration, and that it in fact might be. And he thought it likely that we have been visited by other technological advanced civilizations. But to him, it was very unlikely that it happened every other weekend. It was probably more like once in 10,000 years.
Right.
And and of course, it's a matter of history that he fought to not have the Blue Book data destroyed when others were hoping to do so, this kind of thing. So yes, he was on the skeptical side of the fence. But, just like if we were looking at a religion, you have believers and non-believers and agnostics and degrees, different shades in the middle. He was somewhere in the middle. And I find with a lot of them, even those at the extreme, although I will concede not always, if you back up and you start by engaging them with the bigger picture, you may find some common ground,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you think about it, there's only two possibilities when you look at the biggest question of all, right? The two possibilities are we're alone and we're not alone. And the answers, whichever one is ultimately proven to a skeptic's satisfaction, is a pretty daunting finding.
And I think it comes down to belief too, because like you're reviewing the same facts, the same information, and then you're just deciding whether or not that's possible or not. So it becomes challenging. It's challenging.
Well, it's yeah, of course. I suppose just from that I'd be on the believers camp, but I find it difficult to argue it's not possible because we're here.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It happened once.
Yeah.
That you cannot deny that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I've heard a few that do. But
no, you're right. Like if it did happen once, it can happen again, and it can happen again and again and again and again. It's a matter of determining the who, what, where, and when. Or
it happened before.
Right.
Or is yet to happen again. Whatever. I mean, looking out through the cosmos, the scale of time and space is so vast. It's hard to even envision or play with those concepts as a thought experiment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Perfect. That was good. That was a good icebreaker question, Cece. Thank you. That's probably the longest icebreaker we probably had in a while. That's
the longest answer I've given to it. And in a sense, it was kind of like two answers, but I think it's true. I think, unless you get somebody that's just illogical, and I know how frustrating it can be. Myself, I'm rarely getting in those debate situations. I kind of love it. Usually, like you say, you go to an event, Ryan, it's a love-in, but I welcome and I enjoy that, and I haven't done enough of that, but I find, if you find common ground, you can go from there. But again, my mission is not to change your mind or break it. Let them decide. I'm presenting what I've discovered, and I find, what I've discovered over the years is not what I expected, and that's the great part of it. It's like science. People want the big breakthroughs. Then you always hear of the eureka moments, but in actual fact, the most interesting thing you want to hear when somebody looks at their data and says, "That's funny." Mm-hmm. That's that moment of insight.
Odd. Yeah,
that's odd. That's what what I like finding, and I found that a number of times in the work I've done since '93. So,
okay, we're gonna get into that work, but before we get into that work, I gotta ask the question: why are you the way that you are? And what I mean by that is, how did you get here? Like, this bio that I read. Like, where did this start for you? And walk me through your life.
Well, there's two ways I can do that, and I think I'm going to take way too. Sometimes I can start that at the age of 12, but I think we're going to jump ahead to April of 1992.
Okay.
And because that's what led to me getting active in this field. And what it was is I was with a close friend, a partner of mine at the time, and she'd gotten home from work, and we were watching a rerun of the old show Unsolved Mysteries. This is back in the days when, in '92, when reality television was something closer to reality television. And on that show, this was the one that had the segment about the Roswell incident. It was the first I'd heard of it and whatever. And we sat and watched that with interest. And when the show was over, my partner turned to me and said, do you think that's possible? Now, unlike myself, she had formerly been an academic. She was employed in something else at the time, had a master's degree in biology and education, right? And she found it difficult. And she says, do you think such a thing's possible? And I said, well, I know it is. And that's when I first started speaking of my memory to her of the Shag Harbour incident, mostly secondhand information from tales of my grandfather, who was in the area and was one of the many non-reporting witnesses at the time of the event and in the days afterwards. And my personal memory of having a UFO sighting that same night at Dartmouth Cove in Dartmouth. It's a cliche, but seeing is believing. But, it was the details of grandfather's story and what happened. The other thing is at 12 years old, something young boys and girls don't do anymore at the time. I used to sell newspapers at a bus terminal in the morning. And I can remember a few days later when the Shag Harbour incident became a headline story in the Halifax Chronicle Herald, which was the broadsheet I used to sell to people darting to their buses. And, the Chronicle Herald was not like a tabloid. It's a broadsheet. It was considered one of Canada's most conservative papers. And, the headline read, could be something concrete in Shag Harbour UFO crash, RCAF. Well, you don't get that every day in the Herald. So, that stuck with me. But it was watching Unsolved Mysteries, because here's what happens. And when it was over and I told the story, my partner there seemed fascinated by it. And she said, the guy that was on that, who was on camera, the physicist, which, of course, was Stanton Friedman, right? She said, he lives in Fredericton, New Brunswick now, which is where she was originally from before relocating to Halifax, and her family was still there. And I said, really? That's surprising. And she said, yeah, I think he came here for the health care or whatever. I said, yeah. And she said, you should call him up. And I said, I'll do that. And she looked at me again and said, I know you, Chris, you won't do it. And she grabbed the old landline that was there and plunked it on my lap and dared me to call. Well, the line was drawn in the sand. And in those days, what people did, I called the long distance operator, was surprised there was a listed number for Stanton, dialed the number, and a human answering service cut in right away and said that he wasn't at home and could they take the message. And then they added, if it's an emergency, we have a contact number. And my friend was poking me and going, go ahead, get it. So I got the number. I didn't know where I was dialing. Turned out it was Austin, Texas, and he was about to leave from a motel to a conference to give a presentation, Flying Saucers Are Real. And when I called, he picked up the phone and he talked to me for 20 minutes, maybe 30. And I told him my story, my recollections. I didn't have a date or anything. He said he'd never heard of it, but he started by giving me practical advice, Ryan. And the first thing he said, I can remember when I was done with my narrative, was, Chris, I think you're in luck, he says. You know why? He said, this should be easier than what I'm doing with Roswell. He said, because fishermen don't move. And it was a bunch of little practical advice he gave me. He promised to send me a letter. I received a snail mail letter. He sent some applications that he said he'd gotten from a friend for the Fund for UFO Research. And I sent that off, and one thing led to another, and persistence paid off. And the next thing you know, I was in Ottawa going through hard copy files and interviewing face-to-face the former one of the former majors that ran the Air Desk, which was the RCAF's division that dealt with UFO investigations in the 60s. And next thing you know, people were saying, do you want to appear on my show? How would you like to write a book? You've done this. And the cast was set, and all because that line was drawn in the sand by my partner, and I had to step over that line. It was like a double dog dare. That was what got me going, and one thing led to another. And I had no intention of, like, the beginning of writing a book or going to television. It was like personal curiosity and what would this guy advise? I wanted some answers. I'd always wondered about it. And yeah. So
were you witness to the Shag Harbour event?
I was not in Shag Harbour. I lived in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Okay. But there were sightings all over the province at night. In fact, The thing is, over the next few days, they were all eclipsed. There was sightings over
But you were around. How old were you in 67?
Well, I was 12 years old in 67.
So 12 years old is what you're talking about. That would be 67.
1967, I was
Okay.
12. Yeah, I'm 67 now.
Okay, so that's when the event took place.
That's when the event took place, right?
So
However,
that's what was in your mind when you saw the Roswell thing, then you reached out to it.
Well, that's right. I mean, the thing is, yes, there was a personal sighting, and that was, that I had here in Dartmouth. There's many others did. That made the newspaper too, by the way. But it was soon eclipsed by the Shag Harbour incident, because down there, of course, the Navy sent naval divers. There was an underwater search. There was about 70 witnesses showed up at the shoreline. And one of the very unique things about the Shag Harbour case is that 7 people called the nearby RCMP detachment immediately. Nobody reported a UFO.
Right.
Everybody called to say they thought a plane had gone down in the harbor, or simply that lights had entered. It was the authorities that first attached that label to it, because as time went by, Ryan, they seen there was no missing or late aircraft, right? And because of the location, there was a nearby NORAD base and another U.S. base at Shelburne. And of course, they were checking with Halifax International and the Rescue Coordination Center, and with no missing or late aircraft. And the thing is, the 3 RCMP officers all saw it on the water. One of them, who was out on highway patrol, saw it both in the air and on the water. And, as that information came together and the aggregate of it built up, combined with the fact that there was no readily available conventional explanation, and eventually an underwater search that was unsuccessful, it quickly eclipsed these other sightings like mine and some that had happened in the Bay of Fundy and over other Nova Scotian communities. But my memory was strong of Shag Harbour because, of course, as a 12-year-old boy, when my maternal grandfather came back home from the Shag Harbour area, he told me all about, them watching the Navy divers go down each day, and everybody talking about it, people being fearful that something might come back and get tangled in their fishing gear, or, whatever. And it just had that real, it just stuck with me. And then, when they claimed no results and the military search was called off days later, it was always puzzling and stayed with me. And, but I never did anything about it until watching that rebroadcast of Unsolved Mysteries. As I like to say, and nobody else did anything with it either, because down here, like I say, life can be challenging. People go home, wonder how they're going to pay the power bill, make a sandwich, and forget about it.
Interesting. I'm actually, I'm going to bring up our timeline here, because I have the only document that's available right now that I could find on Shag Harbour. The D&D UFO report, Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia, October 11th, 1967, approximately. I'm just going to read it. It's just a small excerpt.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'll see if that kind of if you can kind of take it from there. Because for me, and I'm still looking for documents. You've shared some documents with me as well.
Well, I'll send you a good deal of stuff there.
And then we can kind of add this to the database. But my knowledge of Shag Harbour doesn't go outside of this document. So for those who are watching, let me see if I can zoom in here so we can kind of set the scene. For those who may not be familiar with the Shag Harbour incident, this is a UFO report from the RCMP in Lower Wood Harbour, Nova Scotia, which is Shag Harbour, right?
Yeah, it's right next to it. One blends into the other. Yes.
Yeah. So it says an RCMP corporal and 6 other witnesses observed what they believed to be an unidentified flying object off the southwest coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, on the 4th of October, 1967. The object was described as approximately 60 feet in length and was flying in an easterly direction when first sighted. During their observation, the UFO descended rapidly to the surface and made a bright splash as it struck the water. For some time after the impact, a single white light remained on the surface. The RCMP corporal endeavored to reach the floating white object, but unfortunately, before it could reach the location, the object sank. A search of the area failed to produce any material evidence which could assist in explaining or establishing the identity of the object. An underwater search conducted by divers from the Department of National Defense also failed to locate any tangible evidence which could be used to arrive at an explainable conclusion. So, evidence of the event happening, six witnesses, RCMP, the Department of National Defense, all looking into this, didn't find anything. Approximately around this area here, I guess.
No, it would be the southwestern tip of the province. Right. Okay, you were right there. Yep.
Right here?
Right in that area there. Okay. Yep. And is it possible that you could bring up the D&D memo that I've sent you?
Yeah,
this one here.
I have it right here. So that's
that report that you have, this memo you see now is amongst the collection known as Records Group 77 that can be borrowed through the interlibrary loaner system. Okay. It's 4 small 8mm reels that people can order through their library that's held at Library and Archives Canada. But that document you just showed is actually an attachment to this memo. Okay. In its original form when I seen the hard copies in Ottawa, right?
Okay.
And there is some discrepancies. That was a very early report. This memo here, which you can see at the top, is dated the 6th of October. This
so 2 days after. 2 days after.
Yeah, 2 days after. And perhaps the most significant thing here that a change in the understanding, and it took me years to clarify some of this, that second paragraph there where it says the flying object was described as being in excess of 60 feet. You notice here it says in diameter and not in length. And I can explain that when we're done here. And carried 4 white lights spaced horizontally at a distance of 15 feet. The object flying in an easterly direction, which in other words, it came in from the Gulf of Maine, when first sighted, descended rapidly to the water and produced a bright flash upon impact. 1 light remained on the surface for considerable time, but sank. Well, that's pretty much an agreement except the diameter, but it gives an idea of the size. But the next paragraph is the corker here, number 3. The Rescue Coordination Center conducted preliminary investigation and has discounted the possibility that the sighting was produced by an aircraft, flares, floats, or any other known object. So that leaves a pretty short list of the possibilities, from the perspective of search and rescue. And it took me a long time, to track down the witnesses, the ones in the newspaper and the fishermen and those that have since been part of the society there were easy to find. But the reason why they had changed the determination to diameter was eventually they heard the testimony of somebody who kind of slipped into the dustbin of history for many years, and I was lucky to locate just a few years ago. And that was one of the early reports came from the manned lighthouse on Bon Portage Island that was sitting in Shag Harbour because the UFO actually impacted the water going toward it. Turned out the lightkeeper was in bed, but his wife was up knitting in the living room, and she was staring out the window, saw the lights as they were approaching, and jumped to her feet saying, "Oh my God, an aircraft is going to crash." And, leaned into the living room window. She had a perfect view, but her details were never recorded here as such. Her husband didn't want her to be interviewed, but when I found Mrs. Isabel Tower, and she was the first wife of the lightkeeper who's since passed on, Irvin Banks. When she saw the object hit the water, the lights, as the water was rushing over it, it dispersed the light over it, and she could see the classic disc of it then. And that's something that, we did not have until recently. I located her. She had long been divorced and living out of province, but had returned to Nova Scotia. And it was during the time of COVID when I tracked her down, and we finally sat down and had a face-to-face interview and recorded it. And so she saw that, woke her husband, and those details have been lost, or at least the source of them and why they changed that. And it's one of the great things about that is that all these years later, we're still finding new information. It was only in 2007 that we realized that a Pan Am flight flew over and saw all this from 33,000 feet and had a near collision with it before this event in the middle of the Gulf of Maine. you know, and that wasn't in the first book, but was in the second, Impact to Contact. And like I say, even now, I still find now sometimes people come forward, they have a story, it can't be vetted or verified. But yeah, now what you got up here now is another very interesting one there. If you scroll
just
back
notice
down.
it's the date before the
Yes.
police document, but also the day after
Yeah.
the event. A lot of
Well,
similar information.
let me tell you
too.
something. Yeah, just scroll back up again there so I can tell you what this. Okay, this is a telex. Telex was the primary means of communication before the internet, and you know, in those days in the '60s, right? And at the top there, FMRCC. So that's from the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax to CanForce Head, which is Canadian Forces headquarters. And what this is, it's just a report, you know, from a search and rescue perspective of what's going on here. And by the way, if you go down there just to the letter F, you see where it says dark object in excess of 60 feet with 4 white lights. I can remember thinking how odd. And that's where Don Ledger and I got the title for the first little US book, Dark Object.
Right.
With bright lights, you know, it just seemed to stick in my mind, right? One thing that's often telling about these documents, Ryan, that you find is sometimes you glean more information over the margin notes made by staffers. And by the way, you know, I've had skeptics, Stan, when you talk about, and here's my idea of a bad skeptic. I've had people come up and say, well, those things, particularly when they were more friendly than this one to my interpretation, said, well, you could just wrote that in. Somebody wrote that in later. These are on 8mm microfilm preserved in, you know, LAC, right? You don't write anything on them, you know, it's not possible. But yeah, so that one there gives the idea of 60 feet again, 4 bright lights. And by the way, the lights had an unusual pattern you don't see with commercial air traffic. They went in a sequence like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they'd all flash once together and this would repeat. Kind of an unusual pattern, right?
And they did describe it as a UFO as well.
Oh, yes, that's right. And like I say, but nobody reported a UFO, one of the unique things of the case, right? It was that, right? And yeah, the search was done. When the Coast Guard arrived on the scene, try and picture what it was like when you're there. This is a fishing village, right? It's a Wednesday night at 11:20 when it starts p.m., right? The moon had been up earlier, but it had already set, and it was a very transparent atmosphere that night. You could see 6 magnitude stars without binoculars. It was that kind of a night, kind of rare in Nova Scotia. And people that rode driving along Old Highway 3, there was no road lights in those days along the road. And they had like perfect viewing conditions, really. And, you know, this is what they saw. It was quite clear. And when this thing came in and hit the water, it left a trail of dense yellow foam about half a mile long. When the Coast Guard, you know, the RCMP contacted the life station at Clark's Harbour, which is about 12 miles away. So quiet on site, the people that were standing on the shore, when the twin diesel engines of the lifeboat started in Clark's Harbour, you could hear it in Shag Harbour. That's how it is at night there, you know, so quiet. And it raced toward the scene. When they got there, the yellow foam was beginning to disperse in the ebbing tide. And, you know, the light that had remained on the surface, the single light, which looked like a pale dome of yellow light in some descriptions, had either submerged or extinguished, right? So you do have to ask yourself then, what was at least 60 feet across in diameter that floated on the surface that the RCMP themselves, who you could argue were professional witnesses, was seen both in the air and on the water, had submerged and was never found upon the search. You know, like that in itself paints a very curious picture, you know? Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Well, it's a compelling argument for what I call UFO reality.
So the yellow foam then, was that ever determined? You know, any theories on why it was yellow or foaming or anything like that?
There's been some theories. Now, first of all, people have asked me, did anybody try to collect it? And actually, one gentleman did that was there. One of the fishermen that went out. Before that Coast Guard boat got there, the RCMP commandeered 2 local fishing boats that were tied up at the outside of the wharf. and they went out on the water. But as they were approaching it, the light either submerged or extinguished, depending on how it's described. They stayed on scene till 3 a.m. Remember, this happened 11:20 initially, right? Going back and forth in the water. And at first, when the foam was still cohesive and the patch was dense, and by the way, it was about 80 feet wide and half a mile long, the men were not even fussy about having their boats pass through it because they had concerns for buoyancy, because some of them thought it was still welling to the surface. It was yellowish. It had a bit of a sparkle. Some claimed they could smell sulfur, and others say it was odorless, right? You know,
Right.
you do have those personal differences, right? But the search was called off at around 3 a.m. and resumed again at first light. One of the very interesting things that came out only years later, in fact, it would have been 2001, was with the release of the book Dark Object. We had a book signing in Shag Harbour, and we had it at a local elementary school. A large amount of people showed up in the gym, and the lighthouse keeper, who had never been willing to talk, came forward to say that the next morning he didn't find anything that night. He found an artifact on the island, and he packed it up and turned it over to the U.S. Navy, and was instructed to do so by the Coast Guard. This would have been at odds with the space object contingency plan that was in place, and seemed a very dubious thing. But when we found the wife that gave us the description of the classic saucer entering years later, she said that yes, he did find something the next morning, and she wouldn't let him bring it in the house. And they got in an awful fight because he said she was crazy just for saying that she saw a plane crash, and he refused to get out of bed at first. It's always such a human thing in this, when you hear these stories. I mean, these people, the last thing on their mind was UFOs, like I say, and it was none of the eyewitnesses reported such.
I'm just trying to visualize what 60 feet across is here. So I guess it's kind of quite small. I'm going to zoom in here. I don't know if you can see that line there. I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit closer. But, whereabouts on the harbor did it crash? Can you see that?
Oh, okay. Zoom out there, and I'll be able to. Just zoom out. Okay, zoom out some more. Okay, you see the island that's. Keep going left with your hand. Go to the left with the. Okay, right. Okay, you're close. Just go a little to the north and slightly to the east, and that would have been the point of impact. And it was seen on the surface moving toward open water. In fact, one of the RCMP officers, Ron Pond, when he arrived on scene, and he was the constable that saw it both in the air and the water. The other two were in the detachment and came from nearby Barrington Passage. When he saw it, he got his field glasses out of the trunk, right? And watched it. And according to him, it passed in front of a local feature that's still there called the Budget Buoy. And it blanked out the Budget Buoy. And his guess was that, therefore, it stood 8 feet of relief above the water line. But at that time, remember, it's in darkness. They're just seeing that pale dome of yellow light on the top and not the 4 flashing lights like when it was airborne, right? So for the time that it remained afloat and they commandeered the boats, it was moving toward open water. It would have been basically going, southeast slightly from there toward open sea between the islands and, an open ocean into the Gulf of Maine. Okay. It would have submerged, probably, like I say, a mile to the south of that, when they caught last. Oh, yeah, there's something too. Over the years, you learn all these things. Okay, you have another document. There's one there. Now, this one is an interesting side story too. I could actually identify this one when I was in 1994 in Ottawa and was lucky enough to have a 3-hour face-to-face interview with Squadron Leader William Bain. He was one of the 2 majors who investigated cases for the Air Desk, which was Canada's equivalent of Blue Book at the time. The writing you see here in the column, and certainly the word UFO, is his. You know, I had him agree that printing was his, and I thought it's not, because it's not every day on these military telexes giving orders between the bases or from RCC or from the Air Desk that you see UFO with big block letters and underlined 3 times. And I asked him what that was, and he was like, "Oh, we were quite convinced this was the real deal." He says the more information we were getting from the bases and NORAD, you know. But
well, there's intent there too, because like when you need to underline something, you can just underline it once, but there was emphasis by underlining it 3 times.
Yeah. They were convinced, right? DOPS at the top's Director of Operations. And this here is like what this order is about here. This one is what, from Canadian Maritime Command to the base at Shelburne to the Fleet Diving Unit, HMC at Granby. This is just the initial divers. Initially, they sent down 4 Navy divers, and 3 more would be flown in later. And this is just giving them some rough estimate of where to start. Now, you see that big number at the bottom, looks almost like a smudge that's written with a big indelible marker, 120.
Yeah.
That's actually the Navy number that was added later. In their UFO files and their simple system, it was case 120.
Okay. That's
a Navy number, right? Scrawled on this document. That would have been told over the phone to Bain, right? And of course, as you see here, you know, like I said, you see RG 77, Records Group 77. This is on something, you know, for your people that are hardcore out there that want to sift through the documents, and there's a wealth of other old classic cases. Records Group 77, I think, spans the years from about 1965 till 1981. And these are all cases like this you'll see that have been preserved there, and they're on some really awkward little 8mm rolls of microfilm that you can borrow, the 4 of them, and this is amongst them here. The initial document, although I think it's been added to this collection, the one that was the memo, you know, that had that description, you know, that actually came to me. I have a cover letter with it. That came from the Directorate of History at D&D headquarters directly. D&D has since transferred all this UFO stuff to Library and Archives Canada, and that's a bit unfortunate because I found that D&D gave very good service. You know, it's like when I've dealt with the RCMP directly before they transfer stuff to LAC. The trouble with Library and Archives Canada, I'm not throwing any mud at them, but like a lot of government departments, they're underfunded, understaffed, you know, things drag on. And sometimes the other problem, Ryan, is that when they get these documents from the RCMP or whoever, or Search and or RCC or whatever, the trouble is they'll often sit for years before they get added to a collection. It's not just the retrieval of them, right? And I can tell you from current cases that I'm working on right now that, you know, the Access to Information Act used to be very firmly adhered to, which meant that when you put in a request, you should have gotten an answer in 30 days in your file that you requested. They could ask for a 15-day extension that you would grant them, and that was it. But currently, I'm finding 7 months is good to get a response now. Yeah, currently.
I think they've been pretty good. 90 days at the most for me.
Yeah, well, a lot of my stuff
that's with an extension, and that really depends on what needs to be redacted, I guess.
Yeah, well, the stuff I get, you either get it or you don't. I've never seen a redaction out of the hundreds of things I've requested, strangely. But like the most recent thing that arrived, which was some ship logs from the year 1960. They require reviews because they show our working relationships in it with foreign powers.
Right.
And, you know, so that's an automatic thing in that. But still, I used to typically get them. Sometimes they go a few days over in a couple months, but lately I find my requests. Now, I'm probably just getting the weird stuff here, but 7 months has been typical lately for me.
But you're still getting them. You're still getting
You're
these
still
documents.
getting them, and I'm getting them without redaction. So
Yeah,
I can't complain.
I just realized the documents that we were looking at. I just realized that none of them are redacted. So all the ones I usually get do have redactions.
Well, the only ones I have that have redactions would have been from the point on of the when the Privacy Act came in force. And they're cutting out the identity or the local phone numbers of people.
Right.
I shouldn't say no redactions. You get those redactions, and of course you can account for that, and that's expected. But I've had none redacted for the sake of content or sensitive matters, other than, like you say, privacy issues. And of course that's the new reality. We all know that and accept it. But
okay, so this document here says APRO pre-report, Shag Harbour.
Yeah, preliminary report. And this is just one page from that. This is like a 7-page report. This was found in the late 90s by the U.S. researcher Jan Aldrich. He was as his work on Project 1947 that you've probably heard of. And Jan had... he was going through the papers. He traveled around the country, and he was just accessing anything to do with UFOs from any source whatsoever, right? And he found this report amongst the papers of the late John Brent Musgrave, who had been a researcher back then. And this hadn't appeared anything else. And out of all the documents we have in Shag Harbour, and since I know you're looking and hungry for them now, I will send you the whole thing here. Probably tomorrow there, Ryan, when I get a chance, or the next day there. I'm going to load up your inbox here.
Sounds good. I got the place for it. We'll add it to the timeline. Put the puzzle pieces together.
But I'll tell you, what's great about this is this has information that was not in Records Group 77 or any of the D&D material, right? Okay. What you're seeing here, can you just zoom in on that a little bit so my little eyes, beady eyes, can... There we go. Yeah, at the top, this is about 3 pages in. Werkicki, that's a typo, should have been Werbicki. Here's the interesting thing that you wouldn't find elsewhere. He further indicated that his Flight Lieutenant F, which is Fox, by the way, ironically, unit, was currently in charge of the case, and he recovered artifacts. He's speaking to a spokesman, by the way, at Maritime Command in this conversation, right? Who would be turned over to Mr. Mace Coffey, and that should have been EY, the unit's scientific consultant, who could be reached through Canadian Maritime Command. If anything of extreme interest was found, it would be turned over to the National Research Establishment. Now, that's not in any of the D and things. Now, Coffey is a character that I give him his own chapter in the book, Impact to Contact. A very interesting character, unknown in Canadian history. Yes, he was a scientific consultant to the Maritime Command in Halifax back in the day when it was, first of all, it's no longer located there, but when it was. And the fellow who was in charge of day-to-day operations there, Commander Rex Guy, would only accept the job if he could have him as the consultant. And there was a very tight, weird working relationship back in the day between the Royal Canadian Navy and the Defense Research Board here in Dartmouth, which was a little brick building that sat on Grove Street here in the city. And when they said, we'll give you whatever you need, they wanted this fellow in charge at Maritime Command. He drove over to the DRB, walked into the head of the DRB because he was personal friends with Mace and trusted his scientific acumen. And he said, I want this guy. I'm taking him. You'll get him back in 5 years, maybe 10. And out the door they went with him. Didn't clean out his desk or anything. They built him an office over at Maritime Command. He handled the UFO matters, right? All the stuff that he felt was important, he turned over to the DRB up there. But here, you know how I found him? When I found this report, which was sent, like I say, by Jan Aldrich, right, to me, there's some other things in that, and it's great because there's things in here you don't find elsewhere. It was uncredited on the front of this report who it was. It said this report was asked for by James Lorenzen, the famous James and the team in Coral Lorenzen that were the directors of APRO back in the day, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, which was the second biggest grassroots group in the States, which eventually morphed into MUFON. Okay?
Right, yeah.
The Lorenzens asked for this. I had trouble finding out who wrote this report, But eventually I was able to determine there was only two people who were APRO members in Nova Scotia at the time. And one of them was Gregory Cannon, who's written a few UFO books, and at the time was living off grid in a log cabin in Alaska. A CIA contact found me his phone number, and I called him up, and he was shocked. The first question I can remember when he picked up the phone was, well, he didn't pick up the phone. I left a message, and he called me back instantly, and I accepted a collect call, which in those days I think cost me $75 or something for a half-hour conversation. This was before calling plans, and he come on the phone, Ryan, and first question was, "How did you get this number?"
Yeah.
And of course, and anyway, I told him what I was looking for, and he said, "Well, it wasn't me, so it had to be him." And him turned out to be, what was his name? He was the head of the Royal Astronomical Society at the time. A hell of an investigator, and he wrote articles on. My God, it's terrible that it doesn't often happen. It'll come to me later, but anyway, I'll have all that for you and more. But that is so frustrating.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
Dawson, William F. Dawson. That's it. He'd been a former head of the society. He used to write articles for magazines like The Atlantic, and everyone who knew him described him as quite brilliant. He described this in levels and put some time into it, and this is what you get. And I'll send all that to you and more. And the thing about this is you won't find this anywhere else. You know what I mean? It wasn't at St. Mary's University. It wasn't at D&D HQ. But let me tell you what that led to. The name Coffey, the scientific consultant. Well, of course, I wanted to speak to him, right? So there was actually a phone number on another page in the report. And where was there? Yeah, but it was a work number. I didn't want to call there, and I figured he was retired at this point in the 90s. So I looked him up in an old phone book, and there was a number, and I dialed it. To my surprise, the number was still good, and a female voice answered the phone. And I asked for Dr. Coffey, and she said, "You're looking for my dad, Mace." I said, "Yeah." She says, "Well, he died years ago in the Philippines." I said, "Oh, I'm very sorry." And she said, "Well, it was a long time ago." And I said, "Oh, you must be Sylvia then," which was his wife, because when I looked it up in the old phone book, it had her name too, right? Mm-hmm. And she says, "No, that was my mom. She died 3 days ago."
Oh.
Awkward moment.
Yeah.
So I said, "I beg forgiveness." I said, "Listen, I'll leave you to it. Can I call back in a few weeks?" And she said, Yeah. "What's it about?" And I said, "It'll take too long to explain. I just have one question to let you go, if you really don't mind." I said, "What did your dad do for the Canadian Navy?" And she said, "He was a parapsychologist."
For the Navy?
For the Navy.
He was a parapsychologist for the Navy.
For the Canadian Navy, yes.
He was hired to do so.
Yeah, according to the daughter.
That's interesting.
Well, there was a little bit of a misrepresentation. It was true. That was one of the things on his paycheck, and the reason they told the higher ups as to why the commander wanted him there. He was also a search and rescue specialist. Okay. Right. But he was also a parapsychologist, and he did the kinds of things that he'd advised the Mounties, and they pulled a really great stunt. There was a UFO case 3 years after Shag Harbour that happened, and a guy, little lights appeared and blocked a car, and it stalled, and there was pressure, and it's a largely unknown case. Anyway, what happened was he came down and he suggested to them, put the guy on the floor of the car and drive him around and see if he can tell if he's in the spot where it happened. And the guy would go crazy whenever they'd go near it, and he never went through that spot for the rest of his life, which added 6 kilometers, things like that. He had great ideas like this, right? He'd written papers about it, like the Delphi concept and that, and I found them in the reading room in Ottawa at D&D headquarters. And yet this guy is unknown,
we're talking about this Mace Coffey right here.
Yeah, his real name was Maurice. Mace was a nickname. Everybody called him Mace. Dr. Maurice Coffey, and it should have been Coffey.
Maurice Coffey.
Yeah. He gets his own chapter in the book. Shameless plug. I'll send you a book if I haven't. I don't think I have. I'll send you all this stuff because it explains it. Some of it is actually quicker in book form. But I mean, yeah, and unfortunately, he died of a first-and-last heart attack in the 70s. He left to become the scientific advisor to the chief of defense staff for the Philippines. And he no sooner got there and had a heart attack and passed. Interestingly, he's buried in the high Arctic up there where, they found some of Franklin's men.
Okay.
On the island up there. Why that cairn that was behind, that's where he wanted to be buried. He had a great interest in the high Arctic too there. Very colorful character.
The thing that comes to mind here, I'm just trying to find, I don't even know where it is on my own damn website, but the last name Coffey is familiar to me. And I'm just trying to, where is it? What do we do? I'm pretty sure I got a guy on my team that has the same last name, and I wonder if there is. Yeah, right here, Stephen Coffey. So my drone expert, the guy that I refer to, he's a Coffey.
Mm-hmm.
Spelled the way that you're talking about. So I wonder if there's relation to that.
I don't know. It's a common name in Newfoundland, Ryan. That's all I know. There's not many in Nova Scotia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. The other thing I saw in here, I was reading here, is it said the other detachment of Constable R. O'Brien, where's it here? No, Corporal interviewed 8 witnesses. In addition to the 8 witnesses, the 3 RCMP from Barrington Detachment were observers to a portion of the event. So does that mean the 3 police officers saw the Shag Harbour incident?
Yes, they all did, all 3. You see, when the incident happened, 2 of them were in the detachment in Barrington Passage.
Okay.
And they would have got there and seen it on the water, right? But the 3rd officer there, Ron Pond, he was on Cape Sable Island, which is not a true island. There's a causeway. He was just out there in highway patrol looking around, and he saw it in the air, but he also got there ahead of them and would have saw it on the water, right? And it was him that grabbed the binoculars and had some of those closer up observations, right? Ron Pond, by the way, when I did 4 episodes for, what was that U.S. show back in the 90s called Sightings? It used to be on Fox. It was a Paramount production. He actually appeared on camera in that for us, and talked about it, about his observations. But he saw it both in the air and on the water, right? And he knew that when it passed over, he could tell that it was round. Again, it wasn't lit up. There was the flashing lights, which didn't help. But it was so clear where he was. He saw that outline against the star field on that clear night.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so then you have witnesses seeing it in the water, which are RCMP, which is credible enough to disperse those resources because.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
Right. So it's not. They're not just going to send out search and rescue or the DND from civilian reports.
No, it always comes down to money, and that I can.
That would have been an expensive search.
Yes, and that was certainly drilled into me. When I interviewed Bain in Montreal, in Ottawa, he said in the end it always came down to money. He had argued a few times that, when the UFO activity was intense here in Nova Scotia, he actually wanted to put 3 Sea Kings on standby spread across the province, like one up near Cape Breton, one near Metro Halifax, and one maybe, at Shelburne or Greenwood down that end, so they could get to the sites quicker. There was such a period of activity there. And as he said to me, he'd seen UFOs here himself. And get this, ironically, 100 miles off the coast of Shelburne. He was a pilot at the time, working out of Shearwater, which I live a mile from today. He was flying S2 sub-trackers, back in the days when they were always monitoring offshore for Soviet subs, right? And he had seen them himself, and he said they weren't just mere tricks of light, that he had seen UFOs off Shelburne quite often through his career. So,
Okay, so we're going to pause right here, and we will continue after a message from our sponsors. If you're listening to the audio-only version, head over to youtube.com/, the Experience and Support Association. So you see the video that goes with this audio, which includes these documents that we're looking at and all these things we're talking about. You are listening to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat, a podcast by the Experience and Support Association, and we will be right back in about 5 minutes. See you soon.
It's your business. It's your property. Your assets are worth protecting. Blacklight Investigative and Surveillance Services specializes in patrolling and inspecting residential or commercial property against fire, theft, vandalism, terrorism, and illegal activity. People and buildings are monitored to prevent crime. Keep your property, your people, and your assets safe from threat. Our elite staff are dual licensed private investigators and security guards. Blacklight Investigative and Surveillance Services. Go to blacklightiss.com.
The same thing that draws aliens to our planet is the same thing that draws us to others. Exploration, curiosity, sustainability of life. That's why we go. It would make sense as to why they're visiting here.
Travis! Quit playing around, man. Get back here. Travis!
The last thing I remember was this numbing shock. Stunning sort of a feeling. Very powerful.
Get away from me!
I was just out of my mind with fear, just screaming the whole time.
It's been theorized that aliens prefer remote areas because they don't want to attract attention. Whatever it is that they're doing, they would want to do that in a less populated area. There are multiple accounts of the same thing from people from all over the world. People that do not know each other, do not live in the same cultures, and they're all looking up, they're all seeing things in the sky. So it would be naive of us to think that we're alone.
Ryan is one of Canada's leading new UFO investigators. He conducts and oversees UFO investigations on a constant basis and was really taken by his research. He's compiled a tremendous amount of data regarding UFOs in Canada. And just as interesting, he really goes over how UFO investigations are done and what are some of the mistakes that people make when they submit evidence. Note for starters, don't edit your videos or photos before you send them. If you want to hear more follow-up conversation between Ryan and myself, you can go to richardolanmembers.com, where we have a candid conversation on ufology, the paranormal, and more. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other.
Welcome to the Observation Deck, a state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind virtual platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus, just like you would in real life. First, you install the application and design your very own unique avatar. Then you're free to explore the various areas of the campus at any time from anywhere. There's so many areas and activities to choose from on the platform. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, a large expo hall, a movie theater, a nightclub, an art gallery, and even a beach. Come attend a conference, or take a class, or hear a lecture. Meet new friends and interact directly with presenters. It's all right here on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Where in the world will you go?
Have you ever wondered, or maybe just thought to yourself, if there were others just like you? You know, people with extraordinary abilities, psychogenic advancement, and perhaps unique intuitions. Maybe you just wondered if there were other people who experienced unimaginable, unexplained, or even unusual and paranormal events. Are there people who have more questions, more fears than answers? Well, you're not alone. You've never been alone. We believe you. Sign up for EA today by going to tesacan.org/EA. That's TESACAN.org/EA.
Well, welcome back to you are listening to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat. Have you ever experienced an unexplained event involving the paranormal, UFOs, extraterrestrial, dogman, or any other paracryptid? Head over to our website, www.experienceyoursupport.org, and submit a report. So just click the big purple button up the top here. Let the others who have already reported be that example that proves we are making a difference. If it wasn't for these reports, we would not be able to do what we do, and for that we thank you. And if you're wondering where I got a hat like this that I'm wearing today, please visit www.tinfoilcat.co. Every purchase made goes to support the LEAP project. Thank you, Rex Bear, for this tinfoil hat on Beyond the Tinfoil Hat. All right, Chris. I'm a rookie. I thought I knew some stuff here, and I'm learning quite a lot from you today.
I'm still learning, Ryan, myself, believe me. You only learn sometimes by getting to the point of making a genuine mistake. But the good thing is, as long as you learn from it, you know.
What I like what you're doing here too, and I'm doing the same, except I perhaps don't have the resources as you do, but I do realize that like these margin notes are important because there's clues here. These abbreviations mean things. You know, I do some research where I try to figure out what these places are, and I'll try to pin them on the map. And it's interesting too that this is nowhere close to Shag Harbour, but it's based on the coordinates that was in this document that I was looked at. So even the documents might be wrong.
Well, that's often true. Yes. Yeah.
So it's also trying to figure out where everything is. And you mentioned Dartmouth. Was it How do you say it? Where are you from?
Dartmouth.
Dartmouth. Okay.
Yeah.
I do have an experiencer case from there, which is kind of interesting too. This guy here claims he's seen this Men in Black in a portal. One of his experiences here. I just wanted to show you these because they're in your area, right? Let me see if I can go back.
I've encountered some people that have had experiences here where I'm not familiar with this one, but
I'll just show the visuals here, just for quick reference points. But then this person here saw this. This is a UFO that they saw in Light Noel, Nova Scotia. And then this person here claims to see something like this out in this area here. Yeah. So as we build the database, just wanted for your reference, I'm not just tracking the declassified documents. I'm also putting civilian cases that I investigate too, hoping that eventually some of this stuff that the civilians see might, end up looking like, something in and around these declassified documents. Okay. This document here, what's this one?
Oh, this is a handwritten letter. I mentioned earlier that after all these years, I'd located the wife of the lightkeeper from the man lighthouse that was on duty that night.
Okay.
Yes, the Mrs. Isabel Tower. Her name would have been Banks at the time. She remarried since then, and since then, unfortunately, her husband's passed on. But yeah, that's a handwritten letter about her. It says, like, when I went on Bon Portage, that's the island, most of them down there anglicized at the Bon Portage, with Irvin, would have been Irvin Banks, the lightkeeper, to keep the light. I had to take an oath that I wouldn't say anything about anything I saw. So every night before I went to bed, I would stand in front of the windows and look towards Cape Island, Shag Harbour, and towards Woods Harbour. That night I was looking out and I saw a plane, or so I thought, and I said, oh my God, it's going to crash in the ocean. Then it was going down into the water. But it looked to me as if it just kind of slid right in. I could see 3 lights or more just going in the water. It didn't look like it was going down nose first. I couldn't believe it. And I yelled to Irvin and said that a plane just went in the water. He said I was crazy, but we had the set on and you guys saw and I don't know if there's more below that. Oh yeah,
Yep.
saw the same thing. So I went to Carroll's and they called the Yarmouth airport and they said no plane was missing. So I went back and know what I saw, Isabel Tower. Now, that simple statement from, the wife keeper's wife, you can probably tell from it, one of the themes that went on, and it may have even been one of the issues that led to the divorce. She didn't like being called crazy or not being believed. Like I say, was the fact that, she was dismissed and trying to ring the alarm bells. And it was when the Mounties called the house that he finally got out of bed, when they asked him to do a patrol of the shoreline, right? He found nothing at the time. And when I first interviewed him, it would have been 1994, that long ago. And at the time, Irvin Banks, who was with his second wife at the time, claimed that he found nothing. But in 2001, he's been the only person to ever change his testimony that was involved in the case. When the book Dark Object came out, he claimed that he had found an artifact and that he'd held that back from me. And he announced this, by the way, on the stage at a book signing. We had over 200 people in the room at Evelyn Richardson School. I'll never forget it. And I was sitting halfway back in the audience while, up to this point, the organizer of this had eyewitnesses come up and tell their little story in about 5 minutes of what they saw, where they were. Oh, I saw it from Bear Point. I saw it from this, and I thought a plane crashed. And then Urban got up for the first time and told the story. And up to that point, he'd never had anything to tell me in earlier attempts at interview. So while he was talking, I can remember Don Ledger and his wife Gail were sitting ahead of me in the audience, and I leaned over to Don. I said, "Have you had just about enough of this?" And I stood up and my chair squeaked and everybody stopped and looked at me. And before I could open my mouth, Irvin said, "I know what you're going to say and it's fair." He said, "I held this from you." He says, "I had to think about my pension and the Coast Guard made me swear an oath and all this." I let him finish. And then I said, "Irvin, if you lied to me then, why should anybody here tonight believe you now?" I said it in front of the whole community. And he turned quite red and he said, "That's fair enough." I said, "I'm going to sit down and let you finish and have your say." I said, "But when I'm done, I'm going to meet you down back and I have lots of questions and they're not going to be easy." And I let him finish, right? Over the years, he did attempt to try to back up what he said and, but at the time, he never mentioned who his first wife was, wouldn't give that up and whatever. And it was only years later that I finally found the connection. She was living in New Brunswick. Her husband was dying of cancer at the time, and when she returned to Nova Scotia to live with adult children, and COVID was in, the numbers were good enough, I went to have a face-to-face interview, and she left me with this note that she'd already prepared. But what's really interesting is that Irving's story of finding an artifact on Bon Portage when he patrolled the second morning, when I seen her, and believe me, she still had no love for her ex-husband. Before I even asked the question, she said, "He did find something the next morning. I wouldn't let him bring it in the house. He tried to appease me with it and say, 'Look, I guess you weren't crazy. There was something. I got to pack it up and have the Navy picked it up.'" So, that was very interesting. But he was the only one who ever had changed his testimony. But since then, I have found an RCMP report that talks about something coming in toward the island later that made a whistling, tumbling sound, was reported by people and was thought to have hit Bon Portage. So who knows? But whatever it was, he should not have given it to the U.S. Navy. I mean, we had a thing in place called the Space Object Contingency Plan at the time.
Right.
And which is something I got released by the RCMP, I think in 2001, I think it was. Many researchers had looked for that for years, and, they would always at RCMP headquarters pretend I didn't know what you were talking about. But I caught one of them up, and I in miscommunication, they'd given me the file number of it, and I put in a request, and I was insistent. And the chief archivist, Sergeant Maurice Leferrier, eventually arranged. They would not do it through the act because he said right up front that he would have to get permission, get this, from Ottawa, Washington, and every provincial capital. But true to his word, he came across. He gave me situation updates every month, and eventually that was released. But just one of the many things that come out as a side effect of my continually pursuing for more data on Shag Harbour.
Have you ever seen this this document, the Service and Merit Instructions document, December 13th, 1957? This particular document is actually an agreement between the United States and Canada, where Canada has to pass the information to the United States, so that way they can continue the investigation. So, just to go off of what we were describing and the importance of this timeline. So I'm seeing here in real time that this was in 57 when that document was created. So Shag Harbour 67, right?
Yes.
Roughly around, where's Shag Harbour? Yeah, right here. So the story fits in terms of them having to give. They had to give the information anyways. It was contracted. But anything prior to 57. Like 52, this is kind of when the documents start. This is when they had the Committee on Flying Saucers, but they had no requirement to pass the information off to the states prior to 52. Do you have anything earlier than 57?
What you mean in terms of policy?
No, other UFO reports. Anything?
Oh yes, I have a top secret one from 1950 that I found in Stanton Friedman's basement that he didn't know he had.
He didn't know he had it?
No, he had boxes of stuff he'd never gone through. That stuff's all been given to the privy, but I have one here that's pretty significant that had to do with the Shearwater base that's about a mile from where I live right now. And back in 1950, after World War II, they were starting on the early radar system there at the Naval Air Station. They were starting to see let's just call it UFO activity because it was much too quick for anything they had stationed or was in operational service at the time in 1950, flying out over the outer harbor and the base in Devil's Island here at the mouth of Halifax Harbor.
Okay.
And it was important enough that they got the Defense Research Board to send down some operators and sit with the radar crew for a few nights. And they were picking up such things too while the Defense Research scientists were there. In the end, they kind of dismiss it because, first of all, they say we're not going to examine the visual evidence. We'll just chuck that aside. And I don't know why.
That's like the more important than the documented evidence.
And yeah. Anyway, I'll send that report to you too. It's one of the very few I've seen that at source. It got downgraded over the years. Unfortunately, the cover was so faded. You can't see the top secret stamp. You could barely discern it. But it's the only one I ever had where it started at that and got downgraded over the years. Okay. But it dates in 1950. Boy, I got a lot of stuff to send you. You're going to be.
Well, hey, I mean, it's kind of good. I put the invitation out there to a lot of people. Like Grant Cameron's got documents. I have received some of Stan and Friedman's stuff from Grant as well. Like I got 6,000 photographs from Grant Cameron because he took pictures of the archives before they were donated. So he had access to the file. So I got that I got to go through. I have 500 documents from the Library of Archives. I got a plethora of documents sitting over here that I retrieved myself from like current cases. I don't know where to start, but I mean, like if you want to, but it's first come, first serve is what I'm saying. So if you start sending me your Shag Harbour documents, like you said, tomorrow, then those are the ones I'm working on. And then those are the ones that will get to the database. And then, maybe if we solve Shag Harbour, we'll solve them all because
I think one of the things that's a little different with me is that when you see some of the names in this, even though they're so long ago, before they passed, I tracked down these people and talked to them.
Well, see, go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, not just the witnesses, but in this case, like these DRB scientists and these, and the military officers, right? The Navy admirals. Like I would go right to the source, I figured,
This resource might be useful for you too. So if we go to our declassified points of interest, every time a document gets uploaded, not only do I put it on the timeline, let me see if I can zoom in here. This is kind of hard to see, but every document is going to separate the persons. Okay, I'll give you a quick example here. The persons, organizations, and it's going to associate. So within these two documents here, the Defense Research Board and the first committee meetings on flying saucers, I was already able to determine these 4 names as being associated with the Defense Research Board.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
So as I put more documents in, this part will grow, and you'll get more associations too, and they'll be able to. I'll need someone like you who'll be able to read these names and be like, oh, that guy's important because why? Yeah. Because that's the thing that I'm behind on, is I can connect all these dots.
I could tell you all about them. We're not.
But I have no idea who these
now.
people are. I have no idea who these people are, why they're significant. And the interesting.
Some of them have been significant since. You take Celine there, who was the first director of the Defense Research Board when it became that, right?
See, look at that information I don't have.
Yeah, there was actually a predecessor to the Defense Research Board. The little brick building in Dartmouth actually began in World War II before this was organized by Celine, right?
Okay.
But I'll tell you where his name came up. I managed to make a special arrangement where I went through a secret group of files that I had reviewed, and there was a bunch, most of it was removed, but some they would let me see in Ottawa, that was only, like, they would not transfer it. Like, you had to, put on the gloves and handle their copies. And, I got permission to do it. And they took me to the research room. I'm not going to get into the whole story. There was a bunch of back and forth and negotiations, but in the end, they gave it to me. And when it was being reviewed, I actually went to the review building across the street on Wellington Street and sat around the corner with the guy and bought him lunch and talked to him while he was doing it, just out of sight, reviewing the documents, right? And I tried to get him to explain the policy and estimate how many were being shredded and all this, because I could hear it happening. And it was just an amazing day. But here's the cool part, is when I got into the room, and he wouldn't let me see it there. They had to ship it back across the street to, it was still called National Archives then, right?
Right.
And they gave it to me, and they put me in a room and told me to put everything back the way I found it and seal it up, because the people there weren't allowed to look at it. I'd had special permission, and even the archivist couldn't look at it. So I went through the document. There was very little in it, Ryan. Don't get too excited. But here's the part that gets me, is right on the top. I opened it up. That guy I was talking to across the, from around the corner as he was doing the work, his name was signed, and it dated on the top on a piece of blank yellow paper. And it said, "This is a sanitized file." And when I lifted that sheet off, underneath there was a draw sheet of who had been in before. And just before me, although he had long been retired from the board, was O.M. Celine. So they had him go through it before I got to see it. Like, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you, okay, so I'm seeing the resource here. Pearson. Is it Pearson? Prime Minister Pearson?
Lester Pearson. Yeah.
What do you know about him? Because he's mentioned in one of these documents too.
He was a liberal, and he came into power after Diefenbaker. He claimed to be pro-nuclear weapons and was open to all kinds of things. It's complicated. You could go on all day, but but he ran into a whole lot of resistance. And by the way, the DRB, there was this weird conflict going on back in those days between our Defense Research Board and the British setup and the Americans, because, the British and the Americans didn't really have an equivalent to it. Like in the States, each one of the separate services had their own Defense Research Board, and they didn't share. And then some of them were even attached to, corporations like Boeing or Hughes, those big companies, right?
Right.
So they didn't kind of have a national system like we had. And when ours was set up, it had such a weird history, because the Defense Research Atlantic establishment here, which had been set up as early as, get this, 1942 in the war and kept through, when they assumed, and when they went to them and said, well, you're going to be part of the Defense Research Board, they're like, no, that's fine. We don't want it. And they were saying, well, you got to. I mean, we talked the Air Force into it. You got to join. For Celine to get them to become part of the original Defense Research Board, he promised them basically autonomy. They would only have to answer to the defense minister. They could work on whatever they want and whatever the scientists chose, right? And they did not have to take any orders from the board. It was deemed a special operating agency. And on their thing, they also put, I like this, and to this day, if you look on Wikipedia, when you look at all the different divisions of the current Defense Research Board, which is now called what? Defense Research and Development Canada. You know, they're always changing the names, eh?
National Research Council? NRC?
No, not the NRC, but the, although I think they're under their auspices now. It's now called Defense Research Development Canada, DRDC now. When you look at that and you look at the different divisions like Valcartier, Quebec, Defense Research Atlantic, the Suffield Experimental Air Station, the different sections of it, right? What you'll find, if you look at the Wikipedia thing, and this is actually in the legislation if you know where to look for it, that the Atlantic Division here that dealt with the Navy that grew out of that is deemed a special operating agency. And I like that when you look at all the duties they perform, they have one that none of the others do list. Yeah, Atlantic one there at the top, it would have. Is when you click on that one at the end, one of the things I love this, at the end, what is it? Maritime Information and Knowledge Management. None of the others list that as, you know, a duty or a mission or an oversight ability, right?
Right.
And what's interesting is eventually they came, because of Solant, he went and met with, here's a name you should know, Vannevar Bush in the U.S., right? And tried to set up something where we would send our defense information to them and them to us in what we were interested. And they created positions, and we sent a liaison officer to the U.S., and we created a position and an office and a little place for the American guy to come here. They never ever sent anybody. They figured we didn't have anything that they would be interested in, right? And they were happy to leave it that way. So these guys operated on their own. It was, it was quite the setup. So they had a free hand to do whatever. So when things went to them, and by the way, that APRO article that I'm going to send you, when, you know, we read about coffee and it said anything of extreme interest is found, some of the men claimed that things did get sent to them. And of course, since they answered to nobody, what did they do with it? They didn't have to answer to anybody except the defense minister, and he wasn't asking.
See, so when I spoke to the National Research Council, they told me everything went to the Library of Archives. And when I talked to the Library of Archives, they say everything that we have has been put online. So, like...
Well, that's what they say, but that's not the whole reality.
On the web, for they say everything that we have has been...
Sorry, my Siri kicked in there. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, you know, they might even believe that's true, but that is not... That's not the case in all cases.
No, I don't think it is too.
No, not at all.
So on our website too, if you go to investigations, resources, and research investigation tools, you can actually get to the Library of Archives by clicking that link there. This is what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Access to database. So this database here has, well, I have all these documents too. It took me a while to get them, but this is allegedly, according to a documentation that I have, there's only 456 pages. That's all that they have that they were given from the National Research Council. So those are the ones I'm starting to index, but I haven't started yet. So maybe I can take a pause and do the Shag Harbour stuff. But if I see anything in the Shag Harbour in these ones, because these are archived, not a lot of people you can't find these if you search for them, which is why I have the link on the website. It's kind of like a backdoor portal to it.
Well, I got lots of stuff to send you. You'll probably be busy for a while. You'll get to it when you get to it if you can. But like, sometimes you can ask a question, you get a different answer when you ask it again a little later. I give you an example. There was one time, just to test the waters, Stanton Freeman and I both sent a request in together. And we were asking if they had any more DRB files that came under the heading 3800-10-1 as a type of sighting. And the answers we got were the total opposite. Mine said, yes, they do have. What was I looking for? And Stanton's answer was, no, they don't have. These requests were sent in at the same time, dealt with by the same person.
Because he's flagged, because he's flagged as a person of interest. So when I started doing requests too. My mail got tampered and all these other things that got opened, and I investigate all that other stuff too. Then I made a request as a media company, and I've gotten no information. Then I made a request as a private investigating company, so too. And then I get the information. So I find that when I request as like on the legal side of things, I'm getting the documents. It's still me. My name doesn't change. I think they're looking at the profession. They're looking at what it is.
Sure.
And there is some sort of screening process internally that we don't know about, or maybe you do, but it's arbitrary, like there's no, it's kind of the luck of the draw. Whoever gets assigned to your case, they might take a good look, a real deep look, and find what you're looking for, or someone might just take a quick look and be like, yeah, there's nothing there, and then tell you
I'm not going to name names here, but there are staffers there that I have launched complaints about in the past through the Information Commissioner of Canada.
Okay.
Right? When you do that, Ryan, have you ever gone that route, or?
I'm aware of the route. I wouldn't do that yet because I don't want to burn any bridges, but I've gotten to the point where some of these information specialists have added me to social media and stuff too.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they're just watching or if if they like what I'm doing with the information.
Listen, it's murky out there.
Yeah.
I mean, let me give you one example. I mentioned earlier about the space object contingency plan, right? It was something that early in Shag Harbour and other cases like the Smith brothers case, here in the province, and some in Metro from the 70s and 80s, these cold cases I was trying to reopen, right? And did, and made some headway with. Often when you would say meet the investigating officer, that had filed a report, say in 1980, for example, on a UFO case in Sackville, you'd go see him, and they often referred to this thing called the Space Object Contingency Plan. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, that's the RCMP's policy on how to deal with UFO investigations and the rules.
Right.
And I'd say, okay, so how does one get a copy of that? Like, do you know what it is? Well, he said, they don't get specific training on it. We don't have it. A copy of it is kept at headquarters in Halifax and in Ottawa, and we would call in when we need a sense of direction or what to do next when we look and there's something real to deal with on the ground or whatever. We would call in and they would refer to it. So I'd send in many requests over the years, and they'd say, well, I don't know, do you have a file number? What are you talking about? And I tried every kind of approach and thing, and I talked to other people, I think, Rakowski and many others across the country, and they'd all say, yeah, they tell you about that in the field, but, they won't admit they got it, and, we don't know if it's written down. It's like a legend, right? And I kept looking, and I used to argue with Don Ledger that I co-wrote with, and he said, yeah, you'll never get that thing, blah, 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 like this, right? And one day I was looking for some RCMP reports. I'd heard there was a few good ones. And I don't know I don't think this has changed since, but typically when there was active UFO investigation, say through a specific detachment, it would sit there for a year just in case it was reactivated, even if it was closed, right? After a year, it would be sent to RCMP headquarters, and they would sit there 3 years. And after 3 years, they would be sent in bulk. They would clean it out every now and then and send it to National Archives, now Library and Archives Canada, right? This was the system. So I heard there were some reports I might want, so I contacted the RCMP archivist, and the response I got was, oh, Chris, you got bad timing. We just boxed them all up and sent the whole works. We don't have a case file here. We just sent them all to National Archives, And I said, oh, why? Well, I was hoping to get this one and that. And they go, look, I'm sure there's nothing there. Because, at the bottom, they always say, if you have a complaint, you can call this number. So I would call, right?
Yeah.
And they would answer the phone. And I can remember the staff, her name was, because it's a public service, I'll name her Corporal Lise Lachance. And she said, look, it's all cleaned out, like I just told you. The only thing we got here is some old policy documents that go back to the 40s, like the space object plan or whatever it is. And I remember lay down on the couch like and flipping through some papers, and I jumped to my feet. And I go, that's it. That's what I want. Well, that wasn't what I'd requested, right?
Right.
And she's like, well, no, I have your request in front of me before I took the call. She goes, that's not what you want. If you want that, you're going to have to send in another request. Well, you know how important the file number is. I said, well, if you had it, you saw it the other day, could you go up and just get me the file number? Right. And I could actually hear her high heels clicking up the hall, right? She gets me the number right and comes back. I have her repeat it twice to make sure it's correct, right? So I immediately dash off a request for that, a formal access to information request, making sure the file number is correct, dotted the I's, crossed the T's, put in the $5 check for the receiver general, all that stuff, right? Away it goes. 2 days later, I get a call from Sergeant Maurice Laferriere, who at the time was the chief archivist for the RCMP. And, in a heavy French accent, he says to me, is this Mr. Stiles? Yes. He says, I am Sergeant Maurice Laferriere, the chief archivist. He says, I have your request here, and it doesn't really make any sense to me. Well, I said, what's your problem? I think it was quite clear. He said, this file number makes no sense. I said, well, I'm sure it's correct. Corporal Lachance looked up for me. Well, I'll have to talk to her and see, but I could not find anything, and this number is not anything in our system. He's going, oh, I said, I'm sure it's correct. I said, she had it a couple days ago. And I don't know why I said this, but it come out to me. I was kind of pushing. I didn't want him to put it on the back burner, so it just come out. I said, in fact, she had it in her hand. She'll know right where it is. She read from it to me. Well, she didn't, okay? She just went up and got the file number, which is kind of a stretch of that. Yeah. Suddenly, in a very nasty, he said, oh, she did she? I will be getting back to you. And he slammed the phone down. 10 minutes later, he calls back and says, yes, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. And he paused, and there was a big sigh. I can remember the conversation. He says, I think we could help you. He says, but we have to come to an understanding here. And I said, well, what's that? He says, we can't respond to this under the act. He said, I cannot do it in the time allotted. And this is when he explained he needed permission from Washington and the U.S. and all the provincial capitals and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah. I said, well, I'm a reasonable guy. I said, could I get like an update once a month, a call from you telling me what progress is being made? Yes. I said, as long as you can do that and you're happy with that. I said, I'm a patient guy. I said, I see no information to complain to the information commissioner. I said, do we have an understanding? And he said, I think so. I said, I appreciate it, sir. Good day. True to his word, he called me back every month. And eventually I got it released with no redactions. I'll send it to you. And you won't see the word UFO in it. But this is about anything that falls from space. These were the rules in Shag Harbour. This is the real rules on any landing or crash scenario. These were the rules employed in the high Arctic in Operation, what was it, Morning Star, when the nuclear satellite in 1976, the Soviet crashed in the high Arctic. Okay. Of how them and the Americans worked together, who was in charge, after the RCMP, in Canadian territory. But it's got all these rules in it of who gets to the site, that any bona fide U.S. agency can get an RCMP escort here to whatever. But once Canadian Armed Forces on the scene, they become the lead agency. All the rules are in there, right? Right. So they sent it to me. They paid for the photocopying and everything, and I'll send that to you too. But this is what you're dealing with. Like if you have a form or you go to a list, Ryan, you're not going to get it.
No, unless you're specific and you know that it's there and you ask the question the right way. Too. Yeah. So when you're going through these documents, this is what I found is I went through the documents and they reference another document. So when they reference another document and you only have one page, then you request for the additional pages. And then sometimes they'll say, oh, we don't have that. That's why they keep telling me everything got donated to the archives. So everything within the archives right now is kind of, they keep using that whole like, oh, everything's in the archive. So if it's not in the archives, it wasn't archived. But
that's why they've set it up that way.
Yeah, it's a good scapegoat. But then now the recent stuff with the civilian aviation reports, so the KDOR reports, whenever I get a flight report of a UFO sighting in real time, I make those requests. I remember this one time, I forget what her name was too, but my date was off because they made an adjustment to the KDOR's report, by the time they went to find the thing. So they technically could have sent that back saying no record found because my date was off. But I got a phone call, and then she kind of like implied that my date was off, and was just saying like, did you mean this date? And at first I was like, no, I meant this other date. And then she said it again. Did you mean this date? And it took me like 3 times to realize that she wanted me to say yes. So I said, yes, that's the date that I meant. She's like, okay, great, because we found your file. I'm going to send it over to you.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about that is I wouldn't have known because I filled it out right. The documents got changed on their end because they updated the file or made a mistake, a clerical error, all that other stuff. But this person was nice enough to like call and try to imply through the rules so that way it could get released. So, maybe we're getting a new generation of people looking at these archives, and they want to get that out too.
Yeah, you're lucky, and you get that now and then. And it's always great when you can call the agency back and get somebody interested on the floor there, just on a personal level. Believe me,
they love looking for it too.
Sure.
For it, as long as they can find it.
I mean, a lot of these people in archives, they spend their day looking up and trying to find a picture of what Billy Bishop wore when he went to war. This is much more interesting. They enjoy it. If you engage them, it helps. A direct approach is always good. Remember when I told you about those things that where Stanton Friedman and I looked for those things and we got 2 different answers there, right?
Right.
I asked him, I said, do you know what that's about? I said, do you know what a 3800-10-1 file means at the DRB? He said, no. I said, I thought you might. I doubt. I said, let's find out. And he says, well, how are you going to do that? I said, give me your phone. I was in his house, and I called the DRB in Dartmouth, right? And somebody answered the phone, and I just said right quick, listen, hon, I said, can you help me? I don't have my briefcase with me. I said, what's the code meaning for this to the girl on the phone? And she goes, just a minute. She goes, that's a UFO sighting with radar and visual confirmation. Just like that.
Just like she just told you that, like, no problem, nonchalant.
Yeah, thank you. Let you go by,
okay,
right?
Thanks, got to move on. Yeah.
The other side of this is like I've been on current cases where I was trying to like secure the radar data before the memories get recycled and that, and you have to call NavCan to make sure that happens. So you can have it examined by an ATC supervisor later or whatever, and you call up and you get some new young official there, from NavCan, and they tell you they don't have to do that or whatever. And I said, well, apparently, what's your name? What's your employee number? I'm going to have somebody call and explain your job to you, right? And I just deal with it like that because they do have to do that. It's your right under the Act to even see originals if you decide, and they have to accommodate that.
If it exists, though, that's the thing, is we don't know if it exists. So if they say there's no record found, how do you trust that?
Well, yes, that's right. But in the
how do
case
you
of
trust that?
Okay, but if you hear of a case and it happened a week ago, right?
They're
required by law to maintain those records for at least 30 days, right? So somebody's at least somebody's in trouble. Somebody has splaining to do, if they do not, if can't account for that. But more than once, the first person that I've dealt with at the bottom of the heap in NavCan has told me they don't have to do that. I had the head of the Coast Guard when he told me, well, we don't have to respond to this or whatever. But he was smart enough. He checked with somebody, and as I was writing the complaint, he called back and said, yeah, I'm sorry, we don't get a lot of requests for that here, right? But sometimes you do have to.
I appreciate the tactic. That is something that I'm quite aware of in the many, many other systems, but I never went that far yet because I don't want to burn any bridges because they're giving me stuff, So they are giving me secret documents. They are giving me declassified documents. So I'm like, I don't want
to you, Ryan.
So it's like,
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I burnt any bridges, but I'll tell you this: I've been barred from going in certain buildings. But don't meet me at Tim Hortons with what I want.
There's a potential partnership going on here. We might be able to knock some heads.
Yeah.
Okay, so Shag Harbour. Significant enough event, all this information, yet 2019, Canada decides to mint a coin.
Yeah, weird.
Of the Shag Harbour experience. So this is the coin here for those who don't know about it.
Fastest selling one ever.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I gave mine away. I'm not a collector of anything. They gave me a free one. I gave it to a friend. He said he liked it. When I said, "You want that?" I go, "Here you go." I'm not a collector.
I'm a coin collector, so I would love to get my hands on one of these. But the what does that mean in terms of significance for like confirmation if they're going to mint the coin about it?
Well, I suppose arguably it makes it, drags it into another realm of like Canadian history.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's not something that's of great interest to me, but I recognize, to some that's important, and yeah, and it should be that's. Cool.
Did they mint a coin for any other UFO events?
Oh yes, Vulcan Lake was the first. Shag Harbour was the second. I think they did Clarenville, Newfoundland. There's been 3 or 4 of them. I don't follow it. God, Ryan, I'm not a collector of anything, guy.
No, it's all good. It's just to me, it's kind of like we're trying to get confirmation. We're trying to get some sort of information from our governments that it exists.
Look, if it heightens public awareness, that's a good thing. I often say our biggest enemy is not the boogeyman or anything like that, or government interference. It's apathy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Really.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of the show, but before we get there, let's talk about your event. So, crash site of the 1967 Shag Harbour UFO event, October 1st and 2nd, 2022, in Yarmouth.
Yes, it's in Yarmouth. Yeah, and that's unfortunately necessary. They've always liked to have it in Shag Harbour or nearby in Barrington Passage, but Shelburne County is not geared up to have this. We've got a number of renowned U.S. speakers coming in: Nick Pope, David Marler, Bob Switek, who I've worked with before at the fund, Debbie Ziegelmeyer that I spoke with in Toronto, Martin Willis, the veteran podcaster. They're all coming in, and COVID willing, we'll have it. This is the 3rd time we've attempted to do this. We've had good ticket sales and that. We're having it in the Grand Hotel in Yarmouth. And the trouble was, in the past, is we weren't sure we could have got the talent across the border, right? But I'll tell you what's unique about this, and it sounds like a shameless plug, but I mean it. And people who know me know I'm not big at promotion. I'm not a collector. But there is one thing unique about this you wouldn't get at any other conference, and it's simply this, is that if you go to this event, which is held on, October the 1st and 2nd, the Saturday and the Sunday. On the Saturday all day, we have the presentations there and a couple of fun things going on. But the next day, we're going to put everyone on a bus that wants to stay for day 2, and we're going to take you to the crash site, to where I had the orb sighting in 2018, to both of the secret bases that existed in Canada through the height of the Cold War that were, tied in with these stories. Canadian Forces Station Shelburne and Canadian Forces Station Barrington and Backrow. Also, when you're at site, the running commentary, I'll be there, of course, but some of the actual original eyewitnesses from 67 will be there. So there's not too many places where you can go. You can get the conference, you can hear the experts, you can meet the original witnesses, and we're going to take you to the actual crash sites. The only thing we can't do is take you back in time. But that's kind of unique to be able to do that. And in terms of the locations, we know where they happen. There's no controversy as to these things. So it's a bit of a unique experience. And if you're the kind that enjoy conferences and symposiums, this one's a little different. And hopefully we don't have another big flare-up on some world pandemic. And as long as you can fly in, I know I'm looking forward to it. Everybody wants to do it. And God, we're all ready to go somewhere now. So tickets are still available. That's the website. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, I put the link in the comment box there for everybody here. So I'm just looking through as I learn as well. So it's interesting too, because like Ziegelmeyer, she MUFON, and she's also a diver, right?
Yes,
so
she is, and she's going to go diving with us down there. Yeah, we're gonna. Oh yeah. There's all those other little side activities that are going to go on over the next few days for those that want to really immerse themselves into the experience, right? But yeah. And I'd like to mention, too, before the clock runs down on us, too, Ryan, that I had you recently as a guest on my podcast there.
Right here.
Forbidden Science there. We're going to open your episode. We're not live like here. It's early days for us. This is just going to be episode 30, and we're on kind of a summer hiatus here right now for a few reasons. The producer's real busy doing stuff. They do TV and government work and that. And, Yeah, we're there, and we're going to have you back again because I had questions we didn't get to the first time, and
Yeah,
somebody
that was a crash course. Yeah, that episode.
Yeah, we had trouble. I should point out, I forgot about that. So this was the day that Rogers was suffering and hurting bad, and Rogers was kind of getting us on both ends. Sean, our producer there, has to set up through them, and I believe you were Rogers. Whatever. Anyway, there was technical issues, and that required a bit of editing afterwards, but it's going to be up, and we're going to have you back. And you managed to soldier on and get this done. And so somebody might enjoy seeing you on the receiving end have to come up with the answers as opposed to the questions, and that's where they can find that. But I'm looking forward, as soon as we go back into production here in a couple of weeks, as soon as I get a date, you're going to come back for another round or two there, and we'll go around the mulberry bush. But
good.
This Saturday, it's probably going to take me till then. I got a bunch of commitments tomorrow. I'm going to fill your inbox. Don't feel compelled that I don't need any answer back or a promise that you're going to get to it or do this.
I'll just take them. I'll put them in a box and nice little folder, and then I'll just start working away and getting at them too. And then
I'm sure you'll get to them before Stanton Friedman would have ever had. So
I just like this.
That's it. If there's something special about something that I think you should know, or that if the significance of it isn't obvious, I'll send a line or two with them as I'm attaching files. This will be on several emails, of course, at least.
Yeah, and then actually on that note, just for other people that might want to do the same, what I'm doing is I'm transcribing them, okay, and then I'm also indicating where they're retrieved from. So I'm giving credit where credit is due. So right now it's just got my name here, but I mean, if you were to tell me where you got the files from,
I absolutely,
and I can give credit to the proper person if you got them from somebody else, but if they came from you, then I'll put your name there or whatever. So it's just kind of a way to let others know about the association, because it's a team. It's supposed to be a team effort, right? And then once we get all these things linked up and tagged, you can click these, the Canada tag, and then everything's there. There'll be a Shag Harbour tag, everything. It'll be a good resource for once I get it archived and indexed, and then I'll get you back to be like, okay, here's all the data, here's all the points of interest. Yeah. Who the fuck are these people? Why are they important? Why are they all in this room? What does this mean?
Yeah, well, I try to find that out, and you can't always, but man, I've been pretty good at kicking them up and getting family members, and
we have the history, right? So this is next generation, me doing next generation stuff, but it's still important to bring the history through as well, because I don't want that to be lost. So as much as I can go back in time and transcribe the historical documents, I didn't live in this time era. I didn't grow up in all these other things. There's lots of details that you've mentioned just from looking at these documents, because you've been around during this time for so many years. So it's
and if I hadn't been lucky enough to sit down and press the flesh and be face to face with these people, there's a lot I wouldn't know too. Like when you look through these documents, it's rare that I see some of that jargon that I can't decipher, for example, right? And I'll tell you, what you're seeing there is easy when you get into like old ships logs and that, the deck logs of our Navy ships.
Yeah.
And being familiar with the Navy jargon and the abbreviations, and
so
it can be daunting.
On our resources page here, if we go to acronyms and definitions, this is just something I found along my travels. If it'll open, come on now. But I use this as a resource here that basically tells me what the abbreviations are. I find that resource to be very helpful too. So that's another thing I'll do too as I come across, because I need to get the answers too, but quick references. And then, it'll be cool to see everything kind of mapped out that way as well. Okay, let's end it on, because I got to do what's called our after chat, where I talk to our audience that are still here. But before I do that, let me just see here, because I didn't really go through any of the questions that we had prepped, but I just want to end it at, in your career, what is the moment you're most proud of out of all the research that you've done?
that was not all that long ago, on December 28th last year, right?
Okay.
I finally cracked the Shelburne case that's been rolled into Shag Harbour for too long and that I never felt good about for 29 years.
Okay.
And I now have the correct interpretation of that, the dates, the 19 ships involved on a NATO mission that involved UFOs, and the world doesn't realize this. And in a way, it has been masquerading in kind of the evidence was assumed to be part of Shag Harbour, and this is not so. I have the details on that now. I have the files on that. I'm producing a manuscript, but stuff is still incoming from Canadian and U.S. forces. And I think this case is going to be probably more shocking than a case like Shag Harbour. And what's most shocking of all, and of course that could be applied to Shag Harbour too, is how these things get forgotten, how they slip into the dustbin of history. I mean, when I called Stanton Friedman, he'd never heard of it, right? And, a few years later, of me poking around, and even on American shows, when they had a top 10 show, it was making top 3 on their list. How could that have been forgotten, right?
Right.
Well, I'm working on one now there that makes Shag Harbour look like a walk in the park, I'll tell you here. And how it could be forgotten is staggering. And but again, you're not going to find anything in National Archives. There was no public awareness of this, so it was a lot easier. I mean, would have been pretty hard to hide Shag Harbour. Too many witnesses in the open media coverage. But what happens when you have a case like this and it all goes sideways? It's a NATO mission. You're off the coast and it's under the water. It's a lot easier, And when it does leak a bit and it's misinterpreted, you let it be so. That's the way the CIA likes to tell lies. You tell a little bit of the truth and you let the imaginations run wild and the confusion. And you know what? Other editors, other co-authors of mine, even, I'll point out, and, with some forgiveness to them, I didn't have the answers either. But for 29 years since I first got into this, I was never happy with this Shelburne story being attached to Shag Harbour. And everybody else would say, "Oh, Chris, give it a rest." They would tell me like this. I'm saying, it don't sit right with me. If this happened, as these men are saying, I should find the records. I found it on Shag Harbour, and something ain't right. And it took me 29 years to resolve it, and it's quite a story as to how I did it and found out. Believe me, the techniques I talked about tonight for things like those policy documents, that's just scratching the surface. I went to heroic measures to get some of these stuff. And it's going to be interesting. I'm hoping to have the manuscript done and to go fully public with it by the fall, I'm hoping.
Well, if you need help getting the message out, we can help. Once you get it all done, we can share it for you too.
I will take you up on that offer, Ryan.
Tessa is a media company and a marketing company for the industry, but that is your lead. Hang on to that. Don't give it to me yet.
Oh, I haven't, but
no. But hang on to that, and then we can get that. This is good. And the other thing too, which I find, this is where the appreciation is too, because like with everything that I've been trying to do is just trying to get all the information from all the people. I've talked to all of you pioneers, and you all are focused on your own cases. You're focused on Shag Harbour. Rutowski's focused on Falcon Lake. He may not be the expert on Falcon Lake, but
I believe he is. But
he's focused on that. Grant Cameron is focused on other things too. But you guys aren't it's all the same. You're all chasing the same rabbit. So what I'm hoping to do is once I get everything together and compiled it, we'll be able to see a matrix of all of it combined. But at the same time, it's good to have